This is number 42 Arnold on the Isle of Lewis, a stone hut of the kind the Highlands still call a bothy. Built in the 1870s with no chimney, no nails in its main timbers, no mortar between its stones, and no electricity to this day. Walls of dry stacked stone with a packed core of peat and earth, a roof of barley straw over heather turf. By every modern building code, it should have failed inside a generation. The MacLeod family lived in it until 1965. Historic Environment Scotland has kept the peat fire lit ever since. The building has operated for over 150 years on a system the Hebrides ran for at least 3 centuries. Subscribe and comment for more medieval videos. The same dry stone wall, chimneyless, smoke-cured longhouse pattern archaeologists trace back to the Iron Age on Lewis. Same roof material year after year. Same hearth never allowed to die in the Hebrides. This building has a Gaelic name, Tay Dubh, the Black House. The black is the soot. Today we're going to show you exactly how that soot worked. Starting with the double-skin wall that broke 110 miles per hour gales without a single bolt. The chimneyless peat fire that turned the inside of the roof into a chemical sealant. And the closed loop that plowed last year's roof into next year's field. The word bothy itself comes from the Scottish Gaelic bothan, meaning hut, and in modern usage it covers anything from a herder's stone shelter to the repurposed estate shelters mountain hikers sleep in today. But the building that produced the 300-year roof system is more specific, and historians call it by its Hebridean name, the Black House. Arnold number 42 was not unique, it was a regional standard. The 1928 Royal Commission survey of the Outer Hebrides catalogued hundreds of Tay Dubh across Lewis, Harris, North and South Uist, and Barra. Almost every croft on Lewis was one. As recently as 2016, the SPAB survey commissioned by Historic Environment Scotland walked the entire country and found 305 traditional thatched buildings still standing across Scotland, 236 of them now legally protected. At Girronan on the western coast of Lewis, an entire village of 9 black houses stayed continuously inhabited until 1974. Near Uig, an archaeological team excavated 2 structures inside an abandoned black house village at Bury in 2013, down to their dry stone foundations. This was not one clever shelter in one valley. This was the dominant rural building type of an entire archipelago for at least 3 centuries of documented occupation. And it followed a pattern that goes back to the Iron Age. To understand why it lasted, you have to start with what the islanders had to fight. The climate of the Outer Hebrides is by any modern metric hostile to buildings. The Met Office records mean wind speeds on Lewis between 16 and 18 miles per hour year-round, the highest sustained averages in the British Isles. The same Stornoway weather station logged its record gust at 113 miles per hour in February 1962, a number that was tied again in January 2015. Annual rainfall sits between 50 and 60 inches, 1,200 to 1,500 millimeters, across roughly 250 wet days a year. There is salt in the wind for 9 months out of 12. There is no protective tree line. Palynologists date the loss of native woodland on Lewis to roughly 4,000 years ago. The wind on Lewis is what the wind on the mainland would be, without forests to slow it down. That climate is what every Hebridean building has to defeat, and the islanders had almost nothing to defeat it with. No standing timber, no clay for fired brick, no lime for mortar. Imported building material was prohibitively expensive on crofts that frequently operated below subsistence. The Napier Commission in 1883 and 1884 traveled to 61 places, held 71 meetings, and interviewed 775 individuals across the islands. The picture that emerged was of an agricultural population working land that could not on its own feed them. What the islanders did have was gneiss and schist, the hardest rock in Britain, lying in slabs on the surface, and they had an effectively unlimited supply of peat. The black house is what you build when those are the materials in front of you, and that is the wind you have to break. The first layer of the system is the wall, and it is the most physically obvious thing about a black house. The second you walk up to one, it is roughly 3 feet thick, about 1 meter, and on older examples between 4 and 6 feet. It is not one wall, it is two. The outer is a dry stone skin of locally quarried gneiss laid course on course without a drop of mortar. The inner is a second dry stone skin running parallel about a foot away. The core rammed between the two skins like a sandwich is peat blocks, turf, and topsoil. Alexander Fenton, who spent his career documenting Scottish vernacular building, called the flat top of the wall the tobar. This wall does three things at once. The two stone skins shed wind and stop rain. The peat and earth core is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture out of the air, slowly releases it back, and never lets a humidity differential drive water through the wall the way wind drives water through a modern masonry cavity. And the rounded gable corners, which every black house in the Hebrides has, deflect wind shear instead of presenting it with a flat plane to push against. There are no straight 90-degree corners on a black house exterior by design, because a 90-degree corner is what a 113 miles per hour gust uses as a crowbar. The second layer is the fire, and this is the one a modern visitor cannot look at without wincing. There is no chimney. The black house has a central hearth, a flat slab of stone laid into the packed earth floor with a peat fire on top of it that is lit on the day the family moves in and never deliberately allowed to die. The peat smolders rather than flames. Peat is partially decomposed plant material with low oxygen content and high moisture, so it burns between roughly 930 and 1,290 degrees Fahrenheit inside the burning zone. But the smolder spread is only 1 millimeter per minute, about 1 inch every 25 minutes. That is 2 orders of magnitude slower than an open log fire, with less than half the heat and vastly more smoke. That is the trick. The smoke is the point. Slow, oxygen-starved combustion of peat produces a smoke condensate that is chemically very different from a wood fire, much higher in phenolic compounds and carbonyls per kilogram of fuel burned. The black house hearth was not built to keep people comfortable. It was a chemistry reactor running 24 hours a day for 100 years, and it had to bond to something. The third layer of the system is the roof. And this is where the islanders solved a problem that should have stopped them building at all. They had no big timber. The Hebrides had no native forest. What rafters they had came from 3 sources: Atlantic driftwood, salvaged ship timber wrecked on the coast, and bog pine pulled out of peat cuttings, often after 1,000 years underground. The black house sits the crook couples on top of the wall head instead, footed on the inner stone skin, with the thick wall acting as a buttress against lateral thrust. That trick alone shortens the rafter length you need by 30 to 40%. Every crook timber in a black house is bathed in phenol-rich peat smoke continuously year after year for as long as the fire burns. Modern timbers in a modern building get sprayed with chemical preservatives at the factory. The black house impregnates its own structural timber in place. The thatch material on a Lewis black house was almost never wheat. It was barley straw harvested with the roots still attached because the root pad sheds water better than cut straw. In leaner years, it was oat straw, marram grass dragged up from the dunes, wild iris, rushes, or heather over the heather turf, base coat that sat directly on the rafters. None of those materials on their own has the rot resistance of cedar shingle or slate. None of them needs to. Peat smoke deposits 2 distinct classes of preservative onto the underside of the thatch every minute the fire is burning. Together, they make a black sticky residue. The inhabitants called it soot, but chemically, it is closer to a thin layer of pine tar. The phenolic compounds disrupt fungal cell membranes and stop the rot fungi that would otherwise digest the cellulose in the straw. The carbonyl compounds cross-link the proteins in plant fibers and the proteins in any insect that tries to chew through them. Every year, usually in June, after the worst of the spring gales had passed, the Croft family stripped the outermost layer of the previous year's blackened thatch off the roof. They did not burn it, they did not dump it, they loaded it onto a sledge and dragged it to the barley field. That stripped thatch was now soot-saturated. It was loaded with carbon particulate from a year of peat smoke, with ammonia and nitrogen condensed out of the same smoke, with phosphorus and potassium from the peat ash, and with a heavy load of phenolic residue that suppressed weeds and discouraged crop pests in the topsoil. The family plowed it under. The next year's barley grew up out of last year's roof. Then they thatched the building again using that year's barley straw. The straw on the roof in 1880 was the straw the field had grown in 1879. The straw the field grew in 1880 went onto the roof in 1881. There was no waste. There was no fuel input from outside the croft except the peat. The hearth, the roof, and the field were one organism. A working black house was a longhouse. The family lived at one end, the cows lived at the other end, and the two were divided only by a low partition or a hunk-in curtain. To a modern public health inspector, this is appalling. To a 19th century crofter on Lewis, it was applied thermodynamics. A Hebridean cow gave off something in the range of 400 to 600 Joule of body heat continuously day and night. 2 cows in the byre were a steady kilowatt of supplemental heating, dry and constant. 4 cows on a larger croft were 2. The cattle also produced manure that was shoveled out twice a week and combined with the strip thatch in the field cycle. The same single peat hearth that smoked the roof now also benefited from animal heat, radiating up the length of the building from the byre end. The black house was not a hut. It was a small engine, a wall, a fire, and a roof tuned to one another so precisely that every byproduct of one mechanism became the raw material of the next. Hebridean crofters understood something that modern green building consultants now pay tens of thousands of dollars to put back into a house. The best wall is the one that breathes peat and earth between 2 skins of stone. The best roof is the one that cures itself in the smoke of its own fire. And the best fire is the one that fertilizes next year's barley while it heats the room it sits in. If you found this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. We investigate forgotten knowledge that the modern world left behind. Drop a comment and tell us which of the 6 layers, wall, hearth, crook, smoke, field, or byre, surprised you most. Until next time, build to last.